What if the version of you everyone believes isn't the one you recognize anymore? In a quiet corner of the university town, Alex lived a simple, routine life. His apartment, nestled near campus and filled with the comforting familiarity of well-worn furniture and books, was his haven. Every morning, he walked the same path to his classes, greeted familiar faces, and found comfort in the predictable rhythm of his days. Alex and Liam had been inseparable since their school days, their friendship a tapestry woven with shared memories, trust, and countless adventures. Together, they navigated the ups and downs of university life, always relying on the stability of their bond. They shared late-night study sessions, weekend outings, and the kind of unspoken understanding that comes only with years of friendship. It was in this familiar environment that Vanisha stepped into their world. Her presence was subtle at first, just another face in the crowd. Yet, even in those initial moments, there was an undercurrent of something new, something that would slowly begin to shift the dynamics of their friendship and introduce new layers of complexity into Alex's life. Alex and Liam shared a history that predated the present moment. It wasn't just friendship, it was continuity. They had grown up within the same social weather, passed through the same formative corridors of adolescence, and learned who they were in each other's presence. That kind of bond creates an assumption that feels unquestionable. This person knows me. They attended the same university now, their paths overlapping so naturally that it barely registered as a choice. Classes ended, conversations resumed. Lunches stretched longer than intended. Their routines were synchronized, not out of dependency, but familiarity. Liam had always been there, through academic pressure, through personal uncertainty, through the awkward transitions that defined early adulthood. Psychologist John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, described something called internal working models, mental blueprints formed early in life that dictate who we trust, how we seek reassurance, and whose feedback we prioritize. These models don't disappear with age. They quietly govern adult relationships. When trust is established early and reinforced over time, the brain categorizes that person as safe. Safe people are not interrogated. Alex never filtered Liam's words. There was no internal checkpoint, no evaluative pause. Liam's opinions carried weight not because they were forceful, but because they felt aligned, familiar, almost self-generated. When Liam spoke, it didn't feel like external influence. It felt like confirmation. Vanisha entered this dynamic gradually. She wasn't introduced as an interruption, but as an addition, a classmate first, then a shared presence, then someone whose name lingered longer in Alex's thoughts than he expected. She represented novelty, and novelty has a way of destabilizing even the most secure relational structures. Not dramatically, but perceptibly, Alex and Vanisha began to spend more time together. The dynamic between the three of them, Alex, Liam, and Vanisha, began to subtly evolve. As Alex's interest in Vanisha deepened, Liam became a sounding board. That felt natural. Long-standing friendships often become emotional intermediaries, spaces where uncertainty is processed aloud. Alex talked, Liam listened, or appeared to. The subtle shift didn't arrive as criticism. It arrived as concern. Small reframings began to surface. Casual remarks framed as advice. Observations disguised as protection. Liam would tilt his head slightly, pause before responding, ask questions that sounded supportive but carried an edge of implication. Nothing overt, nothing confrontational. Just enough to introduce a cognitive echo, a thought Alex would later hear in his own voice. Bowlby warned that attachment doesn't just regulate closeness, it regulates credibility. When feedback comes from a trusted attachment figure, the mind lowers its defenses. The information bypasses skepticism and moves directly into self-evaluation. Alex didn't feel manipulated. He felt guided. And because the guidance came wrapped in familiarity, he didn't notice the recalibration taking place. His confidence didn't collapse. It adjusted, slightly, imperceptibly, like a compass nudged off true north by a degree too small to notice, until the distance traveled makes the deviation undeniable. At this stage, there was no conflict. There was no villain dot and no confrontation. Only trust doing what trust does best, opening doors. And Alex, unaware that some doors are easier to walk through than to walk back from, continued forward, believing that familiarity could never mislead him. Nothing in Alex's life collapsed all at once. There was no argument, no betrayal that could be pointed to, no clear moment where everything changed. Instead, the shift arrived quietly through conversations that seemed ordinary at the time. Liam never criticized Alex. He never challenged his character or questioned his intentions outright. What he did instead was ask questions that sounded reasonable, questions that felt thoughtful, questions that didn't demand answers, but stayed behind after the conversation ended. You think she might be reading that differently? Maybe she's more sensitive about these things. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just wonder how it comes across. At first, Alex didn't react. The comments didn't feel threatening. They felt considerate. And because they came from someone he trusted, they felt worth thinking about. But thoughts, once introduced, don't always leave when invited to. Alex began replaying interactions with Vanisha in his head. Small moments, casual conversations, texts that once felt natural now seemed open to interpretation. He started noticing pauses, changes in tone, subtle shifts in energy, things he had never analyzed before. This wasn't panic. It was reflection. Or at least, that's what it felt like. The problem with reflection, when guided by someone else's framing, is that it rarely stays neutral. Without realizing it, Alex had begun measuring himself against standards he never consciously agreed to. He wasn't asking, was I being myself? Anymore, he was asking, was I being appropriate? And those are very different questions. Vanish's responses became harder to read. Sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes present, sometimes unavailable. That inconsistency created a quiet urgency in Alex, an unspoken need to get it right, to say the right thing, to avoid saying the wrong one. Uncertainty as a way of amplifying self-focus. Alex didn't suspect manipulation. He suspected himself. That was the turning point. He began adjusting his behavior slightly. Nothing obvious. Softer language. More hesitation. Less certainty. He told himself he was just being thoughtful, more aware, more mature. But beneath that reasoning was a growing discomfort he couldn't quite name. The more he tried to align himself with what he believed was expected, the less grounded he felt. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt measured. Spontaneity gave way to calculation. And calculation, when prolonged, becomes exhaustion. What Alex didn't realize yet was that doubt doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't need to accuse. It only needs to redirect attention inward, away from what's happening, and toward what might be wrong with you. By the time Alex noticed the weight of it, the doubt no longer felt foreign. It felt familiar, like a voice that had slowly learned how to sound like his own. And somewhere in that quiet internal shift, the ground beneath him began to move, just enough that he wouldn't feel it until he tried to stand still. Later that evening, they met for dinner. It had been planned weeks in advance, meant to be a casual gathering of classmates. The restaurant was warm, the low hum of conversation blending with soft music, candles flickering across wooden tables. Alex entered with Liam by his side, Vanisha trailing a step behind, and instantly felt the familiar tug of comfort from their presence. But the comfort was layered, fragile, as if it were being tested by something unseen. He smiled and greeted the others, laughed at jokes, and made small talk, yet even amid the chatter, a subtle unease had already rooted itself in his mind. Every word, every gesture was being measured, not by the room, but by the quiet, persistent questions that Liam's earlier comment had planted. Do you think she might have misunderstood? I'm just wondering if that came across right. These phrases had entered his thoughts like whispers, almost imperceptible, and yet they now echoed throughout the dinner. As he conversed, Alex felt the pull of these echoes. He found himself constantly replaying interactions, reassessing his tone, questioning whether his laugh had sounded sincere or awkward, whether his comment about a class project was too forward or too reserved. Vanish's presence added another layer of complexity. She was easy to talk to, warm, attentive, but subtle shifts in her expression, slight hesitations, fleeting glances away, were enough to make Alex pause. He wondered if he had overstepped, misinterpreted, or failed to convey his intentions properly. Her reactions, small and fleeting as they were, became magnified in his mind. Liam, sitting across from him, spoke casually about a group project, but Alex caught himself analyzing every inflection, every pause, every glance. Even though Liam's words were neutral, his tone sometimes carried an undertone Alex couldn't quite identify. Was it a suggestion, a warning, or just a misreading on Alex's part? He could not be sure, and that uncertainty gnawed quietly at him. Psychologist Horney described how internalized anxiety can grow subtly in situations where one feels under scrutiny or uncertain. Even when no overt threat is present, Alex's experience mirrored this quiet pressure. He wasn't being attacked, yet he felt increasingly vigilant, monitoring his behavior and emotions as though they were on display. As the night continued, Alex's outward demeanor remained composed. He laughed, nodded, and engaged effortlessly, giving the impression of someone enjoying a casual evening. Yet, internally, he was balancing a mental ledger. Was he attentive enough to Vanisha? Was he responsive enough to Liam? Was he projecting confidence while remaining authentic? The questions piled on, layering an invisible weight over every movement, every word. Even the laughter felt complicated, genuine, but dissected in his mind. Every smile became a potential misstep. Every joke a risk of misinterpretation. The very act of interacting socially began to feel like navigating a maze where each turn required careful calculation. When the meal concluded, Alex excused himself to the small balcony outside, seeking the relief of solitude. The cool night air brushed against his face, offering a temporary clarity. He leaned against the railing, letting the distant murmur of voices and music fade into the background. It was here in the quiet that he began reflecting on the evening, realizing something he hadn't fully acknowledged. The discomfort wasn't caused by anyone directly. It was growing inside him, cultivated by subtle cues and the weight of expectation. Alex understood, for the first time in the evening, that the doubts he carried were less about what Vanisha or Liam thought of him, and more about his perception of himself. The realization was both freeing and terrifying. Freeing because he could, theoretically, reclaim control over these doubts. Terrifying because it meant recognizing how quietly and effectively they had taken root. By the time he returned to his friends, he carried a composure that hid the internal churn. Externally, he was calm. Internally, the mental recalibration continued. The evening had ended, but the subtle manipulation perception, the internal interrogation, would linger. It was a skillfully invisible force, shaping the way he would see himself and others in the days to come. This dinner, ordinary on the surface, had become a stage for the quiet reshaping of his internal world. And this stage, Alex realized, would be the template for future interactions, where appearance and perception would clash, leaving him unsure which was reality and which was constructed. In the days following the dinner, Alex noticed a shift within himself. It wasn't dramatic, like a sudden argument or a betrayal. It was quieter, a low hum of unease that accompanied every interaction, every message, every thought. The small seeds planted by Liam's questions and Vanish's subtle cues had begun to grow into something heavier. He found himself hesitating before replying to messages, overthinking every word. Simple conversations became exercises in caution. Even casual jokes felt risky. The laughter that once flowed naturally now arrived in measured doses, carefully calibrated to avoid misinterpretation. Psychologist Horney explored how chronic anxiety and self-doubt often arise from social pressures and internalized criticism. Even when no overt criticism exists, Alex was experiencing this firsthand. The social environment remained the same, but his mind had become a minefield of potential mistakes and imagined disapproval. Alex's confidence, once steady and unshakable in familiar settings, had started to waver. He questioned his instincts, doubted his decisions, and found himself walking on mental eggshells. Friends' intentions, particularly Liam's, were no longer accepted at face value. Every interaction was filtered through a lens of uncertainty. Did he really mean that? Was I too forward? Too reserved? Did she notice what I didn't? The emotional cost was subtle but relentless. Sleep felt lighter, less restorative. He noticed a tension in his shoulders and a constant undercurrent of worry during the day. Even his mind, usually a space for ideas and curiosity, had become preoccupied with self-monitoring. What once felt like reflection had mutated into mental surveillance. Alex caught himself replaying moments from days past, searching for evidence of missteps that might not have existed. A joke that had landed perfectly in his mind now seemed potentially wrong. A text he had sent seemed ambiguous under the microscope of doubt. Each small memory was examined and judged, and yet, outwardly, he continued to appear composed. His friends noticed nothing unusual. Smiles, nods, laughter. They all continued, masking the inner turmoil he carried. It was exhausting, maintaining a facade of normalcy while his emotional energy quietly drained. Psychologically, this aligns with Horney's concept of neurotic trends, where people develop patterns of compulsive self-criticism and hypervigilance in social situations. Alex's mind had begun to prioritize avoidance of imagined disapproval over authentic expression, a subtle but powerful shift in behavior. Even Vanish's presence became a mirror for his insecurities. A fleeting glance, a pause before responding, a laugh that seemed slightly delayed, all of it was magnified in his mind. These small ambiguities, when filtered through the growing self-doubt, made him question not only his interactions, but also his own judgment. He felt trapped in a constant loop of analysis, unable to separate reality from the doubts that had taken root. The quietest moments became the loudest in his mind. Walking alone on campus, reviewing conversations in his head, sitting in class, imagining the ways his words might be interpreted. Each reflection reinforced the invisible pressure, making Alex more cautious, more hesitant, and increasingly unsure of himself. By the end of the week, Alex recognized a change he couldn't ignore. He felt heavier, not physically, but mentally. The emotional consequences of subtle manipulation were no longer abstract. They had seeped into his day-to-day life, shaping his perceptions, his confidence, and his emotional stability. The seeds of doubt were no longer seeds. They had begun to take root, growing into vines that twisted through every thought, every interaction, and every decision. And yet, Alex still believed he was navigating life normally. He didn't realize that the quiet influence shaping him had already begun to direct the course of his relationships and his sense of self. It started with a simple thought: I need to talk to Liam. After days of mental rumination, Alex decided he couldn't carry the weight of doubt any longer. He wanted clarity, just one conversation where he could say, I don't understand. What's going on? He imagined it would be straightforward, a reassurance that everything was normal. But clarity is rarely straightforward when the mind itself has become a battlefield. Alex approached Liam in their usual hangout spot on campus. The familiar surroundings should have felt safe. Yet, as he opened his mouth, the words that had been rehearsed for hours stumbled over one another. Questions came out hesitant, cautious, almost apologetic. I just wanted to ask about Vanisha. Do you think I've been misreading things? Liam listened, nodding, attentive as always. But there was a subtle shift, a slight tilt of the head, a measured pause, a neutral tone that carried no explicit judgment, but hinted at something Alex couldn't quite name. The friendly environment, the casual demeanor, it all felt like sand slipping beneath his feet. Psychologist George Simon, known for his work on co-regression, describes how subtle manipulation can make confrontation ineffective. When the person guiding your doubt maintains plausible deniability, the one questioning themselves often leaves the conversation feeling more uncertain than before. Alex experienced this firsthand. Instead of receiving reassurance, he left with quieter, more insidious doubt. He replayed the conversation immediately after it ended. Liam hadn't said anything overtly negative. He hadn't blamed Alex. He hadn't even suggested he was wrong. Yet Alex felt smaller, unsure, as if the very act of questioning had confirmed that something was amiss within him. The confrontation, rather than liberating him, reinforced the invisible grip of uncertainty. The subtle cues, the neutral tone, the careful framing, all had worked together to leave Alex doubting not Liam's intent, but his own perception. Vanisha, meanwhile, remained distant yet warm, her ambiguous presence amplifying Alex's inner turmoil. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of self-scrutiny, and every response, however neutral, seemed weighted with hidden meaning. By the end of the day, Alex felt the emotional exhaustion settle in. The failed confrontation wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. The mental and emotional pressure had intensified. The doubts, which once felt like small ripples in his mind, now had the power to shape the flow of his thoughts, interactions, and feelings. This is the moment where manipulation transitions from quiet suggestion to tangible psychological effect. Alex was not being attacked. He was being subtly reshaped, guided by the weight of his own self-doubt, a masterful orchestration that left him questioning not his friends, but his own reality. And as he walked back to his apartment that evening, he carried with him the realization that some battles are won without a fight, and some victories are measured not by action, but by what remains unseen, unspoken, and unquestioned. After the failed confrontation, Alex noticed patterns he hadn't before. Conversations that seemed ordinary now carried hidden layers. Moments that once felt spontaneous now seemed orchestrated. He began to see the subtle positioning of people. The way Liam's remarks gently nudged him toward introspection. The way Vanish's smiles and pauses held just enough ambiguity to make him second-guess his interpretation. He realized slowly that he had been placed in the middle of an invisible triangle, not as a villain or a target, but as the axis around which others' perceptions rotated. Every interaction between Liam and Vanisha now seemed to contain unspoken commentary. Small glances, carefully chosen words, fleeting gestures. They weren't accidental. They were triangulated signals, directing Alex's focus inward, leaving him isolated in his own mind, while appearing socially connected on the outside. Psychologist Murray Bowen, the founder of family systems theory, coined the term triangulation to describe how tension between two people is managed by involving a third person. In Alex's case, Liam and Vanisha, intentionally or not, had created a dynamic where Alex became the stabilizing or destabilizing figure, and he, trapped in self-reflection, had unknowingly adopted the role. It wasn't obvious. That was the point. Alex began replaying events with new awareness. Why had Liam phrased that question that way? Why had Vanish's reaction seemed delayed? Why did his own self-assessment feel heavier after certain conversations? The pattern emerged like a slow sunrise, illuminating a landscape he hadn't recognized. And yet, understanding didn't bring relief. Awareness carried its own weight. To see the manipulation, or the triangulation, was not to escape it. Every social encounter now carried the tension of expectation and ambiguity. Alex had to navigate not just his own thoughts, but the invisible currents between others, all while trying to remain authentic. Despite this, there was a clarity in the revelation. He recognized that the doubts and anxieties he had carried weren't entirely his own. They had been gently nudged into him, growing quietly as he internalized subtle suggestions and ambiguous feedback. He began to see that some of his internal conflict wasn't personal failure. It was a reflection of the social architecture around him. The triangulation, once invisible, had now been exposed, and with exposure came choice. Alex had continued to internalize the subtle manipulations, or he could start reclaiming his perception, noticing how external forces influenced the way he felt and acted. The revelation was not a resolution. It was a pivot, a turning point where the world didn't change, but his awareness of it did. Alex now had the framework to begin disentangling his thoughts from the influences surrounding him, though the process promised to be neither easy nor quick. As he walked through campus that evening, the weight of understanding mingled with exhaustion. He realized that the quiet power of triangulation was as much about what goes unseen as what is spoken. And that insight, however subtle, marked the first step toward reclaiming his mind from the invisible architecture that had subtly controlled it for so long. The weeks that followed were quieter, slower. Alex no longer reacted impulsively to the subtle cues that had once dictated his emotional state. Awareness had given him a fragile armor, not of defiance, but of understanding. He realized that his self-doubt had never been entirely his own. It had been cultivated, nurtured by the invisible forces in his social world, amplified by his desire to belong and to be understood. He spent long evenings walking alone to the quiet streets near campus, reflecting not with panic, but with intention. Each step became a meditation, a gentle rehearsal of his own thoughts, free from the filters he had applied unconsciously for months. The familiar rhythm of his city, once background noise, now became a grounding mechanism, a way to anchor himself in reality instead of perception. Psychologist Carl Jung wrote extensively about individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of self, including the shadow, the part of ourselves shaped by fear, doubt, and external influence. Alex began to see his shadow not as a flaw, but as a component of growth. The doubts, the anxiety, the overthinking, they were not enemies. They were signals, markers of moments when his perception had been influenced. And through that recognition, he could reclaim ownership of his mind. And yet, even with clarity settling in, one question remained, quiet but persistent. How do you step away from people who shaped you, not with malice, but with subtle control, and reclaim yourself in silence? Alex sat on a park bench, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the cobblestone path. For weeks, the quiet hum of doubt and self-questioning had been his constant companion. He had replayed every interaction, weighed every word, and observed every glance, not for enjoyment, but to survive within the confines of friendship that had quietly shaped and eroded him. The decision had crystallized slowly, like frost forming on a winter window. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. He knew that to protect his sense of self, he needed distance, not confrontation, not explanations, just space to breathe, reflect, and reclaim his mind. He typed a few lines into his phone, a note that would never be sent aloud, a silent declaration for himself. I need to step away. This isn't about blame. It's about knowing who I am without being influenced by the doubts planted around me. I need to find my own rhythm, my own voice. He read it once, then folded the phone into his pocket. The act wasn't cathartic. It was deliberate. It was the first real boundary he had drawn in months. The first clear assertion that his perception, his mind, and his choices belonged to him alone. As the evening deepened and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, Alex walked home slowly, each step deliberate, each breath conscious. He didn't look back. He didn't turn to check on Liam or Vanisha. The decision was not about punishment. It was about survival, clarity, and reclamation. Psychologist Carl Rogers emphasized the importance of self-authorship, the ability to define one's own identity and set boundaries when external influences threaten authenticity. Alex's withdrawal was an embodiment of this principle. Not aggression, not retaliation, just a quiet, resolute act of self-determination. In the days that followed, Alex didn't seek out his former friends. He didn't need validation. He rebuilt small routines that reminded him of his own rhythms. Early morning walks, hours spent reading, moments of reflection that weren't clouded by the shadows of doubt he had carried for so long. The absence of those relationships created a vacuum, yes, but it also revealed space. Space for clarity, space for growth, space for the voice that had been silenced by subtle manipulation to return in full strength. And in that silence, Alex discovered something profound. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you, letting you notice it only when you are ready. The world around him remained unchanged. The campus, the city streets, the echoes of past interactions, they persisted. But Alex was changed. He had stepped away, not in anger, but in clarity. He had drawn lines, claimed boundaries, and finally understood that some connections, no matter how deep, are not worth sacrificing the mind and heart that define you. He continued walking, the shadows stretching longer as night approached. He felt the first real sense of autonomy he had known in months. It was quiet, uncelebrated, but it was undeniably his. And in that quiet reclaiming of self, Alex finally felt a measure of peace.